You ever meet someone who acts like the entire planet exists just to inconvenience them? That's HOA Karen in my neighborhood. If a bird dared to sing before sunrise, she'd file a complaint. If a kid left a scooter by the sidewalk, she'd call it community vandalism. And somehow, I became her sworn enemy the very moment she laid eyes on my old red barn. Now, to any reasonable person, it's just a weathered old building that stood proudly since my granddad's day. But to Karen, it was a violation of neighborhood visual harmony. Yes, those were her exact words, delivered like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama no one asked for. It began on a calm Sunday morning. I was tightening a hinge on the barn door, toolbox in one hand and coffee in the other, feeling pretty content. Then I heard it, screeching tires tearing down the road. Karen's SUV slid to a stop like she was leading a SWAT raid. She stepped out, hair sprayed into helmet form, sunglasses covering half her face, and pointed straight at me like she was directing airport traffic. "That barn," she announced, "is not only an eyesore, it violates HOA policy. It must come down immediately." I almost spit out my coffee. "Karen, that barn's older than most of the houses in this neighborhood, and definitely older than your manicure schedule." Didn't faze her one bit. She started circling the barn, snapping photos like she was collecting evidence for CSI Suburbia Edition. Then she barked, "Expect a fine in your mailbox," before storming back to her SUV and peeling off like she'd just shut down a drug ring. Here's the kicker. My barn isn't even part of the HOA's jurisdiction. Their boundary line stops 4 feet before my gravel driveway. But that didn't matter to Karen. In her mind, my barn was a rogue structure threatening the order of her perfect little world, and she wasn't bluffing. By Monday, I had a thick envelope waiting in my mailbox, official HOA letterhead and all. 3 full pages accusing my barn of every possible offense short of grand theft. Apparently, it was unsafe, unsightly, and detrimental to neighborhood property values. And there it was at the bottom, Karen's dramatic cursive signature. Like she thought she was signing a national decree. Now, I could have ignored it. But where's the fun in that? Instead, I decided to play dumb. I wrote back, "Thank you for your concern. The barn is perfectly safe and serves vital community purposes." Which was technically true, if you count my tractor, a few hay bales, and 2 freeloading chickens as community assets. Karen didn't find it nearly as funny. The very next week, she arrived again. This time with 2 HOA board members trailing behind her, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen strutted up to the barn, gesturing dramatically like she was unveiling a crime scene, pointing out every inch as if she'd just uncovered a national scandal. Chipped paint, leaning beams, even a bird's nest tucked in the rafters. Karen pointed to every detail like she was unveiling evidence at a crime scene. "See? Hazards everywhere!" she shouted, just as a robin dive-bombed her hair in perfect comedic timing. I leaned against the fence, sipping my sweet tea, watching the performance unfold. One of the board members finally squinted at me and asked, "Wait, is this even HOA property?" Karen's eye twitched like she'd been hit with a jolt of electricity. "It doesn't matter," she barked. "It's visible from the road, therefore it falls under HOA jurisdiction." Her logic was so twisted, I half expected her to start quoting imaginary HOA amendments. At that point, I knew I had her. "Funny you mention visibility," I said. "Because this barn's been visible since 1926. My grandfather built it with his own 2 hands. It's practically a community landmark." The board members exchanged nervous looks. Karen looked ready to scream into a decorative throw pillow. But she wasn't done. Oh no. Karen was about to take things up a notch. 2 days later, a city inspector showed up at my gate, clipboard in hand and exhaustion in his eyes. Apparently, Karen had filed a formal complaint claiming the barn was unsafe and illegally erected. He looked at the barn, then at me, and sighed like a man who'd seen this play before. "Sir, you got any documents on this structure?" he asked. Without a word, I handed him an old black and white photo, my grandfather standing proudly in front of the barn beside 2 horses. The inspector chuckled. "Well, looks like this thing's been around longer than half the town." He jotted a quick note. gave me a knowing nod and left, clearly unimpressed with Karen's crusade. But that visit told me something important. Karen wasn't backing down. She wasn't the type to quit when reality proved her wrong. She was the type to double down, to escalate, until a minor annoyance turned into a 5-alarm drama. And deep down, I knew she was about to make her biggest mistake yet. Because the more she pushed, the closer she got to waking up a part of the law she really didn't want involved. And sure enough, that day came. When the sheriff showed up, he didn't roll in quietly either. Sirens blaring, lights flashing, the full Wild West entrance. Karen must have thought her prayers had been answered, because the second that cruiser pulled up, she came strutting out in a floral blouse and an oversized sun hat, grinning like she was about to see me carted off in cuffs. She even waved her HOA clipboard like it was a warrant. The sheriff stepped out, adjusted his belt, and gave me a nod. We'd met before. Small town, old friends. Before I could say a word, Karen launched into her performance. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This dangerous, hideous barn is ruining our neighborhood. It's unsafe, unsanctioned, and—" She dropped her voice. "It might even be illegal." The sheriff didn't flinch. His expression could have been carved from stone. He let her rant for a full 3 minutes while I stood there biting the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Finally, he raised a hand. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you do realize this barn's been standing since before the HOA even existed, right?" Karen blinked like she'd just heard another language. "That doesn't matter. Rules are rules, and I'm the president of this HOA. I demand you enforce the law." The sheriff leaned back, crossed his arms, and gave her that tired parental look reserved for toddlers mid-tantrum. "You want the law? Fine, here's the law. Any structure over 50 years old can qualify as a historic landmark in this county. This barn's pushing a century. If anything, it's protected by law. And you, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "might just be messing with county heritage." Silence. Pure, glorious silence. You could practically hear the gears grinding in Karen's head as her jaw dropped so far I thought she'd swallow a fly. "Up a historic landmark?" she stammered. "That's ridiculous." "This eyesore?" the sheriff repeated, cutting her off mid-rant. "Ma'am, this eyesore is older than you, me, and your HOA combined. It's got more right to stand here than your vinyl-sided McMansion ever will." I lost it, tried to keep a straight face, but the grin spread so wide I must have looked like I'd swallowed the Cheshire Cat. Meanwhile, Karen's face was heating up faster than a microwaved tomato, but of course she wasn't done. Karen never quits. She just reloads. Out came her phone, fingers flying. "I'll have the city revoke this." "I'll call the mayor," she snapped. "Go right ahead," the sheriff said dryly. "The mayor's father helped build this barn. Want me to call him for you?" Karen froze. Her hand trembled mid-dial, her brain visibly buffering. It was the look of someone realizing every move they'd made had led them straight to checkmate, but the sheriff wasn't done twisting the knife. He reached into his cruiser, pulled out a stack of papers, and handed them to me. "Sign this, son. It's a request to have the barn evaluated as a historic site. Given its age, I'd say approval's guaranteed." The look on Karen's face was art. Her mission to demolish my barn had just turned into me getting government protection for it. The irony was so thick you could butter toast with it, but she wasn't finished humiliating herself. You can't just make this dump historic," she sputtered. "That'll attract tourists. People stomping all over, ruining our peaceful neighborhood." The sheriff smirked. "That's the idea, ma'am. Folks love history. And if it brings money to the county, even better." Right then, a few curious neighbors wandered over, drawn by the flashing lights. When they heard what was happening, they started cheering. One old-timer shouted, "About time somebody gave that barn respect. My granddad worked in it during harvest." Suddenly, it wasn't just me versus Karen anymore. It was Karen versus the entire neighborhood's nostalgia. Her eyes darted around as the realization hit. She was outnumbered. Still, she tried to salvage her pride. "This isn't over! I'll take this to court if I have to," she barked. The sheriff chuckled. "Go ahead, ma'am. But fair warning, half the judges around here grew up playing in that barn's hayloft. You might have trouble convincing them it's a nuisance." You could feel the fury radiating off her. If anger were fuel, she could have powered the whole county for a week. She stormed off muttering about conspiracies while the rest of us stood there laughing. But the sheriff wasn't just protecting me. Before he left, he leaned in and said quietly, "Son, she's been stirring up trouble all over town. You're not the first. But now she's crossed a line." That's when it hit me. This was bigger than a petty feud over a barn. Karen's little power trip was about to blow up in her face, because that stack of paperwork he gave me, it wasn't just the start of protecting the barn. It was the beginning of her downfall. When the county got involved, they didn't stop at approving my landmark request. They started digging into the HOA itself, and what they found made Karen wish she'd never opened her big mouth. See, she thought she could out-lawyer the county. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two, underestimating small-town gossip. Within a week, everyone, from the diner waitress to the church pastor, knew the story. Karen tried to bulldoze a century-old barn and ended up accidentally nominating it for historic landmark status. People started driving by to take selfies with it. A teenager even spray-painted an arrow on the road. Historic barn. Karen hated every second of it. She'd drive past with her windows rolled up, probably screaming into a paper bag. And then the real fun began. The county's historical commission rolled in to inspect the place. Clipboards, cameras, the works. But these weren't boring bureaucrats. These folks treated every nail and beam like buried treasure. They examined the barn's hand-cut timbers, the original iron nails, the weathered siding, and declared, "This is textbook rural Americana." Preservation worthy? No question. Karen nearly fainted. She tried to argue, of course. "It's infested. It's dangerous. It's destroying property values," she screeched, flapping her arms like a pigeon in a wind tunnel. The lead historian, a sweet old lady with bifocals and steel nerves, simply patted Karen's hand and said, "Ma'am, this barn holds more cultural value than your entire subdivision." Karen's eyes bulged so wide, I thought she'd need medical attention. But then came the real twist. Because when the commission evaluates a site, they don't just stop at looks. They dig into the records. And that's when the truth came out. Turns out the very land the HOA sat on had its own buried secrets. The original deed had a clause saying any nearby developments had to preserve the farmstead and its existing structures. Translation? The HOA had zero legal control over anything related to my barn. Their grand authority stopped right at the white fences of their identical little houses. Once that tidbit got around, the whole place turned into a full-blown sitcom. Neighbors who'd lived in silent fear of Karen's HOA rules suddenly grew a backbone. Plastic flamingos sprouted on lawns overnight like rebellion flags. Garden gnomes multiplied. One guy even parked his RV out front with a giant banner that read, "Historic Observation Deck." Karen lost it. She started calling emergency HOA meetings every other night, pacing around like a general losing a war. But no one showed up anymore. Folks were done with her drama. Every time she threatened someone with a fine, they'd just laugh and say, "Take it up with the barn." Then came the knockout punch. The sheriff and county officials officially declared my old barn a protected historic landmark. They even installed a shiny bronze plaque by the roadside. At the ceremony, half the town turned out, clapping and cheering. Kids climbed fences, parents snapped photos, and a bluegrass band played like it was a small-town festival. And there she was, Karen, forced to attend as HOA president, standing stiff as a board, arms crossed so tight you could hear the fabric strain, pretending to smile while every camera caught her looking like she'd just bitten into a lemon. But her downfall didn't end there. During the county's paperwork review, someone noticed something fishy. The HOA's finances. Turns out all those administrative fees and maintenance charges Karen collected weren't adding up. Thousands of dollars missing, fake contractor invoices, and a shady slush fund labeled miscellaneous. Once the word spread, the neighborhood turned on her faster than a cat spotting a cucumber. Board members quit left and right. In a matter of weeks, Karen went from queen of the cul-de-sac to the town's favorite scandal. The final blow came at the next HOA meeting, packed wall-to-wall with furious homeowners. The sheriff walked in, hat in hand, and calmly said, "Ma'am, you're under investigation for financial misconduct. Might be time to find yourself a lawyer." The room exploded. cheers, clapping. Someone cracked open a soda like it was champagne, and Old Man Wilson hollered, "Long live the barn!" waving his cowboy hat in victory. Karen turned redder than a stop sign, stormed out, and that was the last anyone saw of her HOA empire. Word is she packed up and moved away, still muttering about barn conspiracies and crooked sheriffs. As for me, I sit on my porch every evening, sweet tea in hand, watching tourists stop to take photos of the now famous barn. Sometimes I wave, sometimes I tell the story, and they always laugh in disbelief. Because the truth is, Karen tried to tear down my barn. But all she did was make it a legend, a landmark, and the funniest chapter this town will ever remember. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button. Every click helps me bring you more outrageous, satisfying HOA tales. And don't forget to ring the bell icon so you never miss the next dose of neighborly justice. See you in the next one, where karma always finds its way home.